I want to just zero in for a minute here on the eschatological viewpoint that we should consider, and that is this kind of global turmoil is setting the stage, I think, for the Antichrist. It could lead to the kingdom of the Antichrist because there's going to be a cry for peace, 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 and can you calm things down? And Mr. Antichrist will step forward and say, yes, I can, and he will for a season.
Jan, it's exactly what we've talked about on previous sessions that we've been on there together. For those who believe the Bible to be true, and those who look and read the prophecies of the Old Testament, read the revelation of Jesus Christ, read the things that Jesus said in Matthew and in the other Gospels, looking and pointing at the end times, world events that we're looking at today, in my opinion, really appear to be aligning with what we've read and give us great harmony in terms of what we see Daniel and Isaiah, Ezekiel, and other prophets begin to predict at the last days. If you believe, as I do, that the kingdom of the Antichrist is going to be the kingdom of the Mahdi, or the Islamic Messiah, that many in the Islamic faith are looking for, we see the escalation in Israel. We see the alignment of the nation-states that are referenced in the Old Testament as being part of the Antichrist kingdom, all coming into alignment, almost picture perfect with what we read in the Scriptures. Russia becoming a player in the Middle East, Israel threatened on all sides. All we really need, as you said, is that charismatic individual that steps forward and says, the world is in turmoil. Let me bring peace.
Yeah.
Let me broker a peace deal so that the world can have peace. I believe we're in a position right now that the world would openly embrace that individual and say, bring it on. Let's have peace. We'll do what we need to do to have peace in the world. And they will blindly follow this leader till we know the outcome that is not good.
Well, and I don't know exactly how Islam plays into the end times. I have a better insight about it. At my conference back on October 2nd, 3rd, Robert Jeffress actually addressed where does Islam fit into the end time scenario, and he believes it does, though I don't believe, nor does he, that the Antichrist will be a Muslim. I believe the Antichrist will come out of the old Roman Empire. But nonetheless, you and I, basically all we're saying is that there's a man with a plan waiting in the wings somewhere. We don't know his origin. That's kind of up for debate. And he's going to step onto the world scene. We don't know when, perhaps any time. I believe the church will be gone at that time. However, let's move on, John. How do you think the presidential campaign of 2016 will affect the economy? Now, before you answer, let me just say this, that in polls, the number one issue for voters appears to be terrorism. The number two issue has dropped down now. That used to be the economy was number one forever and ever and ever. That has now dropped down to number two, preceded only by the concerns about terrorism.
Jan, when we look at the presidential election, where we are today, to me, as I sit back and look at it from kind of an economic perspective and also from a biblical perspective, what we really see are two competing ideologies. The message that seems to be coming from the Democratic candidates that are out there asking for the vote of the people continues to be basically three things: larger government, tax the rich, and more public spending. We look on the other side, what we're seeing from the Republican contenders that are out there, for the most part, tends to be smaller government, lower taxes, and a reduction of the barriers that inhibit the growth of businesses that fuel our engine and makes our economy grow and be successful. I think that when we look at the populace and we look at the polls that are out there, what we see is that many, many people are on one side of the fence or the other. And so this election's really going to be decided by that small segment of independents that are kind of in the middle. We know the conservatives are going to vote one way, that we know that the liberals are going to vote another way. So really, the sway is, what are the independent voters, the independent thinkers, which direction are they going to move to? I think really the question is, do we continue the policies of the current administration, which is what appears to be the plan of operation for those on the Democratic side, or do we return to more of a Reagan-esque style era, which seems to be the message that's coming from the Republicans that are running for office? Now, Jan, as you said, if the terror threat continues to escalate, or if we see another attack on U.S. soil, economic policies and ideologies are going to be thrown out the window, and I believe that people are going to vote based upon the candidate that they believe is going to be, or at least will not be the best, but maybe has the best chance of bringing peace and safety and being able to protect the American populace.
I agree. So let me just move on here to another couple of issues yet in this segment. So in light of some of the things that we've talked about, John, and we opened by talking a little bit about terrorism. How can the average listener best protect themselves in the coming days? And I'm going to say in the coming days of chaos, because I think that's what it's going to be. Eventually, sometime here in the next year, we are going to hit some real days of chaos. How can the average listener best protect themselves?
You know, Jan, I've thought about this question a lot in my own personal life of late, and as having the opportunity to travel and speak to some different groups, that question has come up. And my first response is maybe a little different than what your listeners may be expecting somebody like myself and who deals with economic matters to say, but I believe, first of all, people need to pray. God's Word says that if His people who are called by His name will humble themselves and pray, God will hear from heaven and He will heal their land. Secondly, I believe people need to come together and begin to mutually support one another. One of the things we're seeing in the United States right now is a polarization of our nation. We're seeing people that are becoming more and more at odds with each other at a time that we need to be coming together. If we look at where we are moving forward in terms of preparation, much like we would prepare if we knew a hurricane was coming, or if we had advance warning that an earthquake was going to strike, or a tornado, or another natural disaster was coming our way, there are things that we would do to prepare. And just like a natural disaster can bring disruptions to our power grid, or to our goods and services delivery system, or to the banking system, any act of terrorism that could happen either on our soil or large-scale global attacks on a global basis, we could see situations that we need to be prepared for disruption. And what does that look like? I mean, it's, you know, if we think back to 9/11 and we think back to the things that people did, many people were unprepared and it was difficult to get goods and services into certain areas. We think back to Katrina and how difficult it was to get goods and resources into New Orleans after the aftermath of that. It may mean setting aside and creating a small food bank, food and water and other things that you need for a small-scale disruption. It may mean having some cash on hand, having some currency available to do trading with. If we think back to World War I and World War II, especially when we look at all of the things that were taking place in Europe, historically we saw that people shared resources with each other. People bartered, they exchanged, they worked the land together for the mutual benefit of other people. I think if we see a global attack coming to our shores and we see terror strike our shores, then in the areas that are affected, it's going to require people coming together and sharing resources. And it's a unique opportunity for the church to be the church. And if the church will take the proactive steps of helping to plan and prepare, they can be God's hand extended, showing mercy and grace to those that are displaced and harmed as a result of any terror attack that could happen in the future here in the United States.
John, what do you feel will be the primary economic issue of the new year?
To me, it really depends in terms of the primary issue that's out there. And we think about what's going on in the world. Right now, I think terrorism is kind of the wild card. And not really knowing what that's going to play is really dictating a lot of things that are out there. There's a number of small little things that by themselves may not mean a lot, but there are a number of things. We've got rising interest rates we may be looking at. We've got parts of the world that are going into recession again. So there's a number of things going on economically that could be problematic, and I don't know that I could point to just one thing that would be a major issue, but I think it's kind of like a deck of cards that's been stacked into a house of cards, or like a Jenga game, and if you pull the wrong block out, the whole thing has the potential to, have serious disruption. So I don't know that I could put my thumb on one thing, but I think there's several things that we can touch on a little bit later in the broadcast if we have time that may be some precipitating things we need to keep our eyes on.